with about mentioned reason, it led to the students limited vocabulary. And the students justified the reason why they never read English material outside the classroom. They said that it could not be solved by the suitable materials at their proficiency level because of the difficulty part and demotivate them. And I reviewed the literature and I found that intensive reading project with readers is a very suitable solution in my study, especially in the context that a very high study costs. The study aims to investigate the effectiveness of guided discipline projects on student vocabulary acquisition, as well as to find out their attitude towards intensively projects and language learning. And there are two research questions in the research. The first is to what extent the intensive reading enhance student vocabulary education. And the second is what are learners' attitudes towards intensive reading. And my thesis is conducted with the action research, and I follow that in the action research cycle. And here are the following intensive reading project procedure. Each week, the student will be delivered a graded reader, and what they have to do is to read the graded reader at home and then fulfill the weekly report. And weekly report and do the follow-up activities. And the next week, the student collected the weekly report, and the student let the students spend about 20 minutes for their students' discussion and explanation. And this procedure will follow the same until week 11. And until week 12, the teacher conducted an interview to seek about their attitude toward intensive reading. Regarding the subject of the study, there are 29 second-year non-English major students, and their total placement scores ranges from 300 to 330, and they will meet twice a week in weeks. To collect the data, the author used the data collection instrument, namely the pre-test and post-test, and weekly report and interview. And here are the major findings. The first is to what extent does intensive reading enhance students' vocabulary acquisition, and the pre-test and post-test here we can show that there are significant difference and again in the vocabulary acquisition. And there are very obvious difference between the pre-test and post-test related to yes marks. There were considerably more yes marked words. And also related to no or not marked words in the pre-test and post-test, and here in 30 words. And we saw that a very significant gain in the vocabulary acquisition because it marks yes item. And related to the second question, what are the learner attitudes towards intensive readings? I collected the results from the weekly report and from the interview. Related to the weekly report, I collected from the weekly report on their general feeling as books, and week by week, they feel more and more motivated and less boring. What about the interview? The interview was conducted with 3 questions. The first one talked about the benefits of intensive reading. The second is challenges, and the third one is about their expectation if another intensive reading project is carried out. And regarding the benefits of intensive reading, most of them said that intensive reading improves, enhance their vocabulary learning, as well as motivate them to read and to learn in English. And the second question is challenging. They said that they encounter a lot of words of different meaning, idiom or phrases in the language and stories. The story also requires them to have a good background knowledge on some specialities such as laws and crimes. And they also wish to have a more available stories for the choice, especially with the formula topics and versions so that we can compare with each other for more deeper understanding. And they would like to establish a social network forum like Facebook or Twitter fan page so that they can post on the new words so that they can ask for advice or explanation. And I would like to recommend for teachers, it's necessary to carefully contribute the interdisciplinary projects and introduce very clear about benefit to the students so that they can fully aware and very enthusiastic, very active in the project. And the next thing is about the material. The material should be of their proficiency level and very favorite topics. And the last thing is still the teacher should monitor the students' reading at home. What about students? We need to understand the enormous benefits of intensive reading and responsible for their own learning. I have presented very briefly about my presentation on my thesis, so I'm very willing to to answer the question from the examination board. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wayne, for your presentation, which is brief but informative. Thank you. And now my pleasure to introduce and call upon the external examiner, Dr. Huang Sunhua, to read a report on the thesis. Dr. Huang.
My comments thesis effect of very extensive reading of students' vocabulary learning, and actually the research project and people's and the following comments on the strengths and weaknesses of the thesis. First, the research is of considerable practical significance as it attempts to find out a way to help improve students' learning English vocabulary. The research purpose is reasonably justified with adequate practical and theoretical background. The research questions are stated properly and the scope of study is defined clearly. Selected language teaching methodologies, discussion of vocabulary learning, and extensive reading are reviewed, which are quite relevant to the research topic and serve as theoretical framework on the study. A large number of previous studies on similar topic are also presented. Document citing and referencing in general is then harder to include interventions. However, if the previously done studies have been discussed and analyzed more critically and thoroughly to identify the achievements as well as the gaps in the research area, the literature will be more complete. The study employed actual research design, reasonable research cycle, proposed and now however, the all information
Thank you, Dr. Huang. Thank you so much. And now my pleasure to call upon the
vocabulary learning at the Academy of Vietnam. The literature review is quite sufficient and relevant with two main areas, namely vocabulary and language learning and extensive reading, which helps to provide theoretical and analytical study. And there are some connections between the literature and the present study, which is a strong point. In Chapter 3, information about the research design, participants, research instruments, procedures, and data analysis is sufficiently provided. Chapter 4 is about the results and discussion, which presents the data collected from the test, from the weekly reports and interview, and how the data helps answer the research questions about the effects of extensive reading of the students' vocabulary learning. And the last chapter presents recommendations for teachers and students, limitations of the study, and suggestions for further research in the area. I would like you to consider the following points. In Chapter 1, the research questions are a bit different from the questions restated in Chapter 3, which means that you would have to revise that and decide on which one would be the right version or the consistent version. In terms of, like, in Chapter 3, you've got like students and learners in two different questions, so I have to revise that and make sure that you've got only one set of research questions. And in Chapter 2, the titles of section 2.1 and 2.1.1 should not include the terms and reading, because I read through that and it's more about language learning rather than about reading. So in general, it's about language learning. And also the title of section 2.1.2.2 should include the vocabulary, the word vocabulary before the word acquisition. And then the next section, sections 2.2.2 could have been included in 2.3, because in 2.2.2 it's about the benefits of extensive reading, and then in the next one you're talking about the previous study, in which actually you kind of repeated what you got in the previous part. So my suggestion is, if you could have a review of all the previous studies and make sure that you are more systematically presenting that, such as if you say extensive reading will help the students improve their attitude, for example, or become more positive, and then you list all the works about who already done the extensive research on extensive reading and found the relationship between extensive reading and positive attitudes. So you say like, okay, extensive reading have, like some of the previous studies have shown that extensive readings help the students become more positive, and then you just have to open the bracket and say who found that. And you would have the list of all these authors, rather than saying one author after the next, and they found the same thing. Okay, so you could have done that. And also some parts of them can seem to me not really relevant, directly relevant to the study. You can just get rid of that, because like you're talking about experiment 1, experiment 2, and experiment 3, and then so what? What is the final result? And also, you should have some explanation about how you apply the 10 principles. Like you listed the 10 principles about using extensive reading, and how did you apply that into your study? Okay, like how many of the principles did you follow, or did you take example? In Chapter 3, as I mentioned earlier, you should restate your research questions and make sure that all the words the words you use must be consistent. In Chapter 4, I got the same comment with Dr. Hua about more qualitative data analysis. That is, like rather than just listing what the students said in the interview. And the table, for example, could be in the line graph, so that the readers can see more clearly how the students improved. And I would like to get some more information about the better and lower level students, because it seemed to me that you didn't mention any of those before that. You say about higher and lower. I don't really get what you mean there. And also, there are some mistakes in the first interview question on page 43 that you will fix that a bit later. And then the APA styles, some of them I have mentioned in here, for example, the tables and the figure. Like when you got it in Chapter 2, you say table 2.1 rather than say table 1, table 2. Okay, so it belongs to that chapter, you should say that.
And also, some of the references are quoted in bullets, so you need to have the page numbers, and also some mistakes that you need to consider fixing before the final submission of the thesis. And I would also like to ask you some questions, but maybe I'll just wait until I will be informed later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You seem to be impatient to ask questions.
I can't wait.
Thank you very much. Now comes the Q&A section. May I ask you, Dr. Han, to start? Thank you. You share the floor.
I don't know how many questions I can ask. Anyway, although I had a very, I really appreciated your effort in doing this piece of study. I think if some points about the study are verified, that if we improve the quality of the physics. So my first question is about the research design. The aim of the study has to be to identify or to measure the effects of extensive reading on students' vocabulary learning. So why do you have to use, why do you have to follow all the steps of an action research position? If you just wanted to measure the effects of something, of extensive reading on students' learning, vocabulary learning, so why do you have to follow all the steps of action research?
Thank you very much for the question. Let me answer the question. Actually, I adopted all the steps in the action research cycle, and I think that my project lasts 12 weeks, and I have to follow one day by day, week by week. And before, I have to measure how students can improve their vocabulary. So I use the pre-test and the full test here. And before in 12 weeks, so I follow all the steps. Very first step, I identify the students' the problem, and I give them the pre-test. And at the end, I give them the post-test, and I follow all the steps in the actual research. I think that is necessary.
Yeah, I know all the steps that you presented in the thesis. My question is, I just want to know how some steps inform the main step of your study, which is to identify the effects of extensive reading on students' vocabulary learning. For example, identifying a problem. So, as a result of this step, help you to move on with the next step, which is collecting data and analyzing data.
So, Bing, do you think that you could have done the research, identifying the effects of extensive reading on vocabulary learning without identifying the problem, which is actually the first step in an actual research cycle?
Yes, actually, I have to diagnose the problem.
Bing, do you think you understand my question? You don't have to answer if you don't understand the question. So, now, my question, I am trying to help you to answer Dr. Hua's question. Do you think that you could have done the research identifying the effects of extensive reading on vocabulary learning without identifying the problem, which is actually the first step in an action research cycle?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
So actually, I think yes.
Just like the problem is the students' biggest problem is a lack of vocabulary. So it has nothing to do with the identifying or with measuring the effects of extensive reading on students' vocabulary learning. Okay, so my next question is about the meaning of the word effects. What guided extensive reading on students' vocabulary.
I but also the negative attitude. I try. I also have some concern before my how to study and they use something like vocabulary level test by the nation, for example, and other. But I think that it's not valid in my study course. They have to, the student read what and I have to check what they have read and for improvement. And I adapted the test format in the course to 2005. And I think it's okay, it's suitable for my situation. And the number of items is 150. And I think that is quite okay for the student to conduct. And then
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Can I ask the next question?
Sure.
In the literature review, you listed 10 characteristics of an extensive reading project. So how many of these characteristics do you think can be applied to your extensive reading project, to your students in the research project, in your own research project?
Because I mean that my thesis is the guide of intensive reading. Yeah. So the first thing I refer the first one is the reading material is easy. I agree with that. They are suitable proficiency level. And the second one is variety of reading material, wide range of topics. But here that my students apply low level and they can themselves find the books so that I guide them to choose what they need to do because I know that what level they are.
Rather than what to choose, or you just gave them.
And Number 3 and number 2 here, I remove it because it's not suitable here. And number 4, already learners please as much as possible before the time
Okay,
schedule.
thank you very
Yeah.
much. I can see that you know what you were talking about and you know what you did. Thank you. So I didn't have to check any further.
Okay.
And the last question is about the weekly report. So in the presentation of the data collected by the weekly report, I could see only very little information you extracted from the weekly report. And what about other parts of the weekly report? How do you treat on all these, on the rest of the weekly report? I mean the summary of the book on the list of the new ones that you want to learn.
Yes.
So you just ignore them.
Actually, I did not mention in my study. So the purpose is that after the graded reader, they will note the new words. So what is the reason? The purpose is they can memorize them by writing, and then in the next week in class they can exchange with partners with the other students and teachers. And what I mean is to help them to memorize them because they have get them to more and more exposures to the words. That's what I mean.
It seems that the weekly report, when you use the weekly report data, it is more about the attitude, to measure the students' attitude rather than checking how much they gain, right? Because we couldn't see much information you found from the report. It's all about the attitude, and nothing to do with the summary or whatever. So we don't see any information, right? So it's just about the attitude. Did I understand that right? I mean, on page 22, when you talked about all the data about the report, it's all about positive attitude. At the beginning, maybe week 1, the students were not really enjoying that, and then later they got more and more interested, and so on. And then you measured that, and you reported that on page 42, and that's it. And then nothing to do with the summary of the work or whatever they read, from the extensive reading again and everything. So you should have reported some more on that. Yeah, that's what you meant. Yeah. Okay.
It is not actually a kind of limitation. It is now if you got something, but you just put away something else in it. Like we are a little bit curious, but you actually were about to do with that later on, or what you actually did, okay, to be later that you have to do it. Because as presented in page 35, you talked, in very much detail about what you actually applied with the reports, and then that's why Dr. Hansen-Paul wanted to know what you actually treated with the data, or with some of the data that you had collected. So just provided a little bit more information about that in the pieces later.
Otherwise, we feel like it's a waste, because you already collected information and you never use that. Yeah.
Okay, so any further questions? Thank you. And how about you, Lan?
Yes, can I just, I'm a bit curious about how you distributed the books to the graded readers to the students. You've got 29 students, and which means that how many books did you have, and how did you distribute the books among the students every week?
Actually, the book library I can download on the internet. I choose what is available and what I don't have to charge. Okay, free. Yeah.
So is it the
I
soft
can download it.
Were they soft copies or?
Soft copy, yes, soft copy, and a lot of things I can show you later.
I know, it's a bit hard.
Because they want to promote their products. Okay.
How did the students? Sorry, how did the students? What did the students? Did the students say anything about the soft copy, or they say, "Oh, teacher, can we have a hard copy?"
Yeah, no, I have soft copy, but I have to print them. Print them. Okay. I print them and I distribute one by one each page to them.
All the 29 students read one book at a time.
But that the books is not so long. Where first thing is starter, that it's 50 pages, 50 pages more than that. 15 is the starter. And I would like to motivate them to learn English because my that level, I think that is suitable for the students because my student not only learn English but also
What do you
other
think?
things.
It's not going to be. You actually need a lot of research and say it is suitable in terms of language proficiency, in terms of content, in terms of the language.
Then another question is about how you conducted the interview. I mean, how did you conduct the interview?
At the end of the week 12, that there are 29 students in my class, and at the beginning I assigned them into 10 groups. Yeah. But I assigned them right beginning of the project. Okay. But how can I interview them with so large number like that? I asked my colleague to conduct the interview with me.
Did you mention that here?
I lost it. I don't mention it. Sorry.
You should
Yeah.
mention that. Yeah. And then so did you just like you group 3 of them, for example, and you ask them questions? I mean, 3 of them at the same time, or how?
That's each group by each group, 3 of them, and I ask them the question, and both she and before the interview, I asked them that okay, the interview that is not perfect, they are great, and okay, so be fair. It doesn't matter.
So if I got three students, and then I ask one question, and then say, okay, you answer, or how? How did you manage that? That's what I'm curious about.
I asked them at the same time because I'm serving, and they can exchange the ideas. And she is my colleague, and I will note down, and then I will compare, so that it should be very comprehensive.
Yeah.
Okay? Because the student are very low level, so I translate the question into Vietnamese so that they can understand the meaning of the question, and then I ask them to Vietnamese, and then I translate it again. Although I think that there are several things that I can transfer, but I think that okay.
Is it kind of semi-structured interview or open interview?
Semi-structured.
Is it semi-structured interviews or structured interviews?
In the oral.
So semi-structured.
You just ask the student. Okay. How about you?
Another way design. Yeah, this is how I research.
Because in page 59, if you go to page 59, it seems that there is a list of students' real names, and I think you need to use pseudonyms for the student's name because it's yeah.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask one more question? Because I'm interested in this argument. I think it reads very well. Do you think that using graded reader will discourage the use of authentic materials, which are very much recommended in the current practice that one?
Thank you very much. I think that in the context of my study, because the students, I mean that the level is quite low because the TOEIC placement test is just from 300 to 330. So I try to motivate them with the graded reader so that they can be very excited about that. However, the authentic materials is, I think that the authentic material, they are also of several levels. But how to choose them, how to adapt them for the task, I think is possible. So I think that we can combine all of them.
Thank you very much.
No. Well, I don't have questions, but I have some comments. Now, then I would like very much to see some sample interview discourses to be presented in the thesis. Now, here you just have questions for the interview, so we'd like to see the interview discourses, what the students actually told you about. Just some sample, and some sample of the tests. Okay, you've got a pre-test and a post-test, so these two samples should be presented in the appendix. I know you described very clearly what the test was like, but we'd like to see the sample text. All right? And the next one, in which you should also say a little bit about how you actually did to make, what you actually did to make sure that you translated correctly what the students told to you in Vietnamese. Because you said the students would answer the interview questions in Vietnamese. So you can summarize the interview discourses here. So did you do anything to make sure that you reflected correctly what they had told you? Okay, you should have mentioned in the thesis. And if possible, I'd like you to say or to present not long, but some passages about attitudes, because we'd like to see the theoretical framework so that you mean attitudes, or you just anchor attitudes to that framework. Okay? Because this is now you say, what are the students' attitudes towards extensive reading, or what are the students' attitudes towards reading skill, for example, but it is more like opinions of the students rather than attitudes as if, terminology. So that's it.
Thank you.
So we don't seem to have further questions or
Are
comments.
those questions of requests?
Sorry?
Yeah.
So many already, huh?
No. Are those questions or requests?
Questions?
It is something like I would like to stop.
No. I mean, you would like to see so and so and so on such and such. And do you expect him to include those things before the thesis is about?
Because it is something to kind of evidence to make sure that you can take answers.
If you add that, it will make your thesis look much better. That's it.
Okay, so we will switch here for the questions. So may I ask you, Mr. Taha, to say a few words on the please?
Thank you very much. I can't wait. First of all, I would like to thank you all for your comments and questions and criticism. Yes, I hope that he learns something from all those comments and questions. I would like to say, because there are many students here today, and what I really appreciate
which is also something that I am very worried about, is that these students, including him, now try to do too many things at the same time. And now for me, my feeling is the thesis is not the first of the list of the must-to-do things. So he could have done the thesis much better if he had been able to focus on just the thesis, or if the thesis had been the first on his list. And if he had done a better thesis, I think his students would benefit much more. That's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, may I ask you, Trần Văn Bình and the audience,